Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, Virtual Hiring Event, Candidate Preparation.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this pre-recorded candidate preparation session for the virtual hiring event. My name is Dennis DeYoung, and I am a business relations specialist here at Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. My primary role is assisting students and adults with disabilities in finding permanent employment with the state of Ohio through our apprenticeship program, as well as advocating for the job seekers we serve with state agencies. I am excited to be here today, co-presenting with my colleague, James. Our goal for today is to prepare you for the upcoming virtual hiring event. Our presentation today will be a discussion on what you can expect to encounter on the day of the event. James, would you like to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what we will be covering today?
Thanks, Dennis, and hello, everyone. My name is James Minutelli, and I am a talent sourcing coordinator in OOD's Southwest region. In my role, I help job seekers, job developers, counselors, and our business relations specialists in various ways to expedite the hiring of individuals with disabilities, with a particular emphasis on securing meaningful employment for our job seekers with our employer partners. I am also excited about the information we will be sharing with all of you today. Before we dive into the actual content of the presentation, I want to take a minute and review some other resources we have made available for you. First, the presentation you are watching is recorded, so you can pause, back up, or rewatch anytime. And a transcript of the training is also available. Also, you will have access to the PowerPoint presentation as well as the resource guide. The resource guide will cover everything we talk about today in greater detail. It is a great resource to help you prepare for the virtual hiring event. As we move through the presentation today, we will be referencing the resource guide. So if you have not accessed it yet, now would be a good time to pause the presentation and access it. You can also find a link to the OOD YouTube channel to see videos and learn more about some of the employer partners who will be interviewing at the virtual hiring events. The resource guide, as well as the other resources we will be discussing today, can be found on OOD's website on the Individuals with Disabilities page under Resources. I want to point out a navigation feature of the resource guide. If you are accessing from a computer, you can simply click on the section you wish to refer to from the table of contents. So, for example, let's click on the virtual interview tip sheet. You will be brought to that page in the resource guide. At any point you want to return to the table of contents, you can click on the Return to Table of Contents link at the bottom of any page, and it will automatically return you to the table of contents.
Thanks, James. That should be very helpful. Now might be a good time to look over the table of contents, because that is going to mirror today's presentation. We are going to start with some technical information on how to access the virtual interviews in the Microsoft Teams platform, either from a computer or a smart device. Next, we will review some tips for using screen readers during a virtual interview and discuss how you can make sure you have any necessary accommodations during the hiring event. We will also review a couple of tip sheets, one on behavioral-based interviewing and one on virtual interviewing.
Dennis, those should be very helpful for candidates to review with their job developers to get ready for the hiring event.
Exactly, James. Since we only have an hour or so today, this training is really designed to help with the interview preparation you are already working on, not replace it. So let's go ahead and dive in. Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities will be facilitating the virtual hiring event on the Microsoft Teams platform. There will be a staff member from OOD in each interview to help with any technical issues. And a member of the OOD Information Technology Department will also be available to help with anything that a staff member cannot handle.
So Dennis, I noticed that when I get on the Teams website, it gives me the option to download the application and set up an account. Will the candidate need to do that before the start of the virtual hiring event?
James, that is a great question. Now, as long as the candidate is joining from a computer, they will not. The candidate will be able to join Microsoft Teams by joining over the web as a guest. But if you download Microsoft Teams, you may have more functionality, which may be beneficial if you are using an ASL interpreter. Also, if the candidate is joining from a mobile device, they will need to download the app. Let's start by looking at the process from a computer, and we will go through the process from a mobile device a little later on. Here we see the link that will be sent to the candidate, which could be either in an email or a calendar invite. Click the link and it will bring you to a web page. You will have two choices. Download the Windows app and join on the join on the web instead. We want to click Join on the web instead. Microsoft suggests that you either use Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome. Your browser may ask if it's okay for Teams to use your mic and camera. Be sure to allow it so you'll be seen and heard in your meeting. Enter your name and choose your audio and video settings. When you're ready, hit Join Now. This will bring you into the meeting lobby. The OOD staff member will automatically be notified by Teams that you are in the lobby and will admit you to the interview when they are ready.
Thanks, Dennis. Before we move further, I want to back up and go over the audio and video settings the candidate will need to choose. The first thing we want to do after entering our name, but before joining the call, is to make sure the video camera is turned on.
James, how do we do that?
It's very easy. Move your cursor to the video icon and slide the switch over to the right. You will notice that your picture appears on the screen. Next, make sure you are not muted by looking at the microphone icon just to the right of the video icon. If it has a line through it, you are muted. Again, just slide the switch over to the right to unmute.
Well, that was easy, James. Is there anything else we need to know?
Yes, if people in a meeting cannot hear you, you might be muted, or you might not have your mic configured correctly. Just to the right of the microphone icon is the Device Settings button. Click that open and you can select the speaker, microphone, and camera options you want.
Got it. Now, what if I use a Mac? Any special considerations?
If you have trouble getting your microphone to work with a Mac, you may need to change one of your privacy settings. Here's how to check. First, open System Preferences. Second, select Security and Privacy. Third, under Privacy, choose Microphone on the left. And fourth, make sure Microsoft Teams is selected.
That makes sense. James, now what if I have an older computer and the speakers or the microphone don't work so well?
No problem, Dennis. Teams will let you use your phone for audio. The call-in number, as well as the conference ID, is on the invitation. Or when you are joining the meeting, you can access it by clicking the Use Phone Audio option, which also brings up the phone number and conference ID. This will mute your video and microphone automatically, so you will want to go ahead and turn your video back on. While you are on the call, pressing *1 will play a description of the menu options that are available during a meeting, and pressing *6 will mute or unmute your microphone.
Excellent. Thank you, James. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use Teams from a smartphone. First of all, I do want to point out that if you have a choice, it is better to use a computer for the virtual hiring event. It will be easier to look more professional and to control things like lighting and sound quality. But if you do need to use a smartphone, you will need to do a little preparation beforehand. To join a meeting through your smartphone, the Microsoft Teams mobile app must be downloaded from the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store. Meetings are available on iOS and Android now and will be available soon on the Windows Phone. Here's what you can do if you're a meeting participant. Raise your hand to get the attention of the presenter. Pin the speaker and other users to your screen so they are visible to you during the meeting, even if someone else is speaking. Tap in the meeting for the meeting controls such as audio, video, end-to-end call. And pinch and zoom in and out when someone is sharing their desktop.
Dennis, will the candidate need to have a Teams account?
That's a great question, James. No, you can join a Teams meeting on the mobile app without an account. Here's how. In the meeting invite, select Join Microsoft Teams Meeting. If you don't already have the Teams mobile app, you'll be taken to your App Store to download it. Download the app and open it right from the App Store page. As before, Teams will ask if it's okay to use your mic. Be sure to allow it so others in the meeting will be able to hear you. Next, you'll be given two options for joining your meeting. Join as guest or sign in and join. You'll want to join as guest. Type your name and tap Join Meeting. Now, once you're in the meeting, you can turn your video or mic on or off by tapping on the center of your screen to show the meeting controls, and tap again to hide them.
Thanks, Dennis. Now, what if I do not have internet access? I know some candidates usually use the library, but that option might not be available right now.
Right. So if a candidate does not have internet connection, they can still call into the virtual hiring event. On the invite the candidate receives from OOD, there will be a phone number and a conference ID in the meeting invite. Just dial in the number to join and enter the conference ID when prompted. The number in your invitation may not be local to you. If it is not, select local numbers to find one that is.
Great information, Dennis. And remember, everyone, OOD will have staff available to help with any technical issues you're having the day of the event.
That's a great point, James. And it leads us into our next topic. Can you talk a little bit about what a candidate should do if they feel they are going to need an accommodation for the event?
Sure, Dennis. This one is pretty easy. Before the hiring event, the candidate will be meeting with their counselor and probably their job developer. This will probably happen virtually. There should be a discussion on what accommodations a candidate might need for the virtual hiring event. The counselor will work with community providers, including sign language interpreters, and provide whatever accommodation is necessary. OOD will also inform the employer partner if it is necessary to make them aware of an accommodation for the interview. This could be anything from having a job developer present on the call to having a sign language interpreter.
Right. Speaking of accommodations, the resource guide does contain a section on accessing the virtual hiring event while utilizing a screen reader. This contains a list of screen reader keyboard shortcuts, as well as a link to the Microsoft support page on how to use a screen reader to explore and navigate Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Office on Accessibility has guides for using screen readers in Microsoft Teams using Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android, or the web.
So Dennis, I think many of the candidates participating in the virtual hiring event have probably never done a virtual interview before. Can you talk a little about what virtual interviews are and why we have decided to conduct them now?
Of course, James. So obviously during the pandemic, we wanted to find ways to help candidates find meaningful employment in a safe and effective manner. But even before COVID-19, virtual interviews have become increasingly popular for companies, government entities, and other organizations. They are being used either as the first step in the interviewing process or the entire interview process. Virtual interviews can occur via several different methods and platforms, including the phone interview, which is just like it sounds, a telephone interview with one or more interviewers, which will not include video, the online two-way interview. This includes many popular platforms, such as Microsoft Teams, Skype, GoToMeeting, and High5. These are preferred as they are the closest virtual interviews to an in-person, live, face-to-face interview with one or more interviewers. The interviewer and the candidate can see each other and interact naturally. Some organizations are using an online one-way interview. In the one-way interview, the candidate will answer pre-recorded questions in a video interview. All candidates receive the same questions with no follow-up questions. Some of the online one-way interviews will have a re-record option, which allows the candidate to re-record their answers. It is important to know the capabilities of the system prior to starting the interview. During our virtual hiring event, we will primarily be using the online two-way interview. But again, we will have the phone interview option available if it's necessary.
Wow, it seems like virtual interviews are a great tool for an organization to find qualified candidates. Considering how new these are and everyone's lack of familiarity, can you talk a bit about technological considerations?
Yes, there are a few considerations to look at prior to the event. First, it is important to check your internet connection 24 hours prior and again 30 minutes prior to your interview. Your internet connection speed should be fast enough to ensure a smooth and uninterrupted conversation with the interviewer, ideally with both video and audio enabled.
Okay, that makes sense, but how do I check my internet connection?
Well, James, there are a couple of ways you can do that. First, you can check the Wi-Fi speed of your internet connection at speedtest.net. The link for that website is in the resource guide. Or you can just Google "test my internet speed" and pick one of the sites that come up. Or you can test your connection by having a conversation with a friend, a family member, or your job developer over the platform of your choice before your interview.
So what can I do if my internet is not as good as it should be?
Well, James, there are a few things you can try. It may help if you move your computer a little closer to your router. Another thing you can try is turning off Wi-Fi on other devices. It's also a good idea to let everyone in your house know when your interview is and asking them to refrain from using Wi-Fi during your interview.
Great. Any other technology tips before the event?
Well, it is important to become familiar with the platform you will be using before the interview. The resource guide has a tutorial that covers more in depth what we talked about earlier about setting up and using Microsoft Teams. Take the time to go through it a couple of times. You don't want to find out 5 minutes before your interview starts that you have to download and install software.
Great points, Dennis. And speaking of being prepared, I want to talk a little about making sure your environment is set up prior to the virtual hiring event.
Now, what do you mean by that, James?
Well, Dennis, unlike in a traditional interview, one where you would be traveling to an organization and meeting in their office, it will be the candidate's responsibility to make sure their side of the interview space is ready for the interview.
So what are some things the candidate should consider?
Well, Dennis, an important consideration is that the lighting is good. Most of us set up our computers so it is easy to see the screen. But in a virtual interview, we want the screen to be able to see us. Natural lighting is best, but on days when it is cloudy, the clouds moving past the sun can cause shadows to move across your face and can be distracting for the interviewer. So it is a good idea to position a light on the back side of the monitor so that you are well lit during the interview. You can use your device's camera to see what the interviewer will be seeing the day of the interview.
Using your computer's camera to see how the interviewer will see you is a great tip. Anything else we need to consider?
Yes, you want to make sure that you have a plain background. If you have a blank wall behind you, that is generally best. Also, check to make sure your device is plugged in or charged. You will want to position the camera so that your face is framed in the camera without cutting off the top of your head or your chin. And there is one other thing candidates can do to prepare for the virtual hiring event, and I know you want to talk about that next, and that is practice, practice, practice.
You are exactly right, James. The best way to be prepared for any interview, traditional or virtual, is to practice. A great thing about using technology is that you can also use it to prepare. You can have a friend, a family member, or your job developer help you practice your interview using Skype or Microsoft Teams and record it so you can view it later. This is also helpful as you can use the recording to check lighting and sound quality. You will want to make sure your answers are clear and can be easily understood. So you will want to practice answering questions. Now, generally answering questions should be about 1 to 2 minutes long, although multi-part or behavioral-based questions may take a little longer. Some of our employer partners will be providing you with a 30 to 60 second introduction to their organization. So you will want to view that prior to the interview. But you will also want to research the employer history, mission, and values. This information is typically found on the employer's website. This can be helpful to identify your personal and professional skills and values that align with the employer. Practice common interview questions that allow you to describe why you are the right candidate for the job. For example, a common interview question is, tell us why you would be a great fit for this position.
Great tips, Dennis. Practicing interviewing techniques is certainly the best way to go into an interview feeling confident and prepared.
Absolutely, James. Could you discuss some things to be aware of during the interview?
Of course. The first thing to remember is that all the standard interview rules apply. A good place to start is by deciding what you will wear.
So, dress professionally like a traditional interview?
That's right, Dennis, but there are some things to consider when interviewing virtually. Yes, you want to make sure you are wearing a clean, unwrinkled shirt, preferably something with a collar for men or a nice blouse for women. But in a virtual interview, you may want to avoid bright colors. A white shirt may wash out some skin tones. Pastel shirts are more flattering.
I would not have thought of that. What else is unique to a virtual interview?
Well, Dennis, when you are in a virtual interview, you make eye contact by focusing on the webcam, not the screen or your notes. If you are using a laptop, the webcam is the white light at the top center of your screen. Another thing to consider, even for an in-person interview, is that the traditional handshake is no longer appropriate and obviously is impossible virtually. So you will want to practice the digital handshake. Nod and say something like, "It's nice to speak with you today." Also, in a virtual environment, you will still want to be aware of body language and facial expressions. Smile. Even on telephone or pre-recorded interviews, the interviewer can hear a smile in your voice. Maintain good posture and try not to fidget. You are going for warm and confident. Be aware of your environment, dogs barking, background noise, cell phone sounds, etc. Do not speak too softly. Don't mention anything about virtual interviewing being weird or uncomfortable. Like traditional interviews, you want to make sure to have some appropriate questions for the end of the interview. For example, what do you like about working at ABC Company? What does a typical day look like? Why have you stayed with the company as long as you have? And like a traditional interview, you will want to send a thank you note by email within 24 hours after your interview. Finally, remember that most virtual interviews are behavioral based. Make sure to practice using the behavioral-based interview tip sheet in your resource guide. And Dennis, I think you have some tips on how to answer behavioral-based questions.
I sure do, James. A good place to start might be with discussing what a behavioral-based interview is. So the idea behind behavioral-based interviews is that the best indicator of how someone will perform in the future is to look at how they performed in the past. For example, if I wanted to find the best plumber to fix a leaky pipe, I might ask some plumbers to describe a time that they had to fix a leaky pipe. If they had not done that before, or if they had done it in a way that I was not comfortable with, I may not want to hire them.
Well, that makes sense. It seems like it might be difficult to anticipate what an interviewer is going to ask. How should a candidate prepare for questions like that?
You are correct, James. One technique that may be helpful is to have 4 or 5 stories prepared that discussed common behavioral-based topics. These may include stories on teamwork, leadership, handling conflict, or getting a task done by a deadline. Then you can plug in the right story to the question you are asked. Also, while answering behavioral-based questions can be challenging, having a structure to frame these answers can help. Let's look at some suggestions for successfully accomplishing behavioral-based interviews. The first step is to thoroughly read through the job description to determine the skills needed to be successful in that position. Make a list of those skills, and don't forget social skills and personality traits. Now, keeping those skills in mind, think back on past work or volunteer experiences or school projects, and identify examples of where you have had used those similar skills. Now, write brief scenarios of those experiences, including the situation, task, activity, and results of each scenario. This is called using the STAR system for behavioral-based interviews. Be specific as possible. Use real stories from previous work, volunteer, or school activities. A good way to organize your answers is to use the template in the resource guide to write down your answers.
Well, that is helpful. Dennis, you spoke about using the STAR system for answering behavioral-based questions. Could you explain that a little further?
Yes, that's a great idea, James. The idea behind the STAR system of answering behavioral-based questions is that it provides some structure around the answers. Answering behavioral-based questions is all about telling a story, so it needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Again, STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. And that is how we are going to structure our answers. Let's take these one by one. Now, to start, the situation sets the scene for the story. You want to describe a situation where you had to take action to overcome a challenge. The key is to paint a picture for the interviewer of what was going on and why it was important to the organization that it be resolved. Be precise as possible. This should be a specific scenario, not a generalized explanation. The T in STAR is task. Here, you want to describe the goal. Specifically, describe what you were assigned to do to resolve the situation. The most important part of STAR is action. You will want to give a detailed account of the actions you took to accomplish the task. It is important to focus on your actions, not the actions of your team or coworkers. Now, this is true even if the question is on teamwork. Again, this is the time to be very specific. Now, the final part of STAR is the result. You want to describe how your actions contributed to resolving the situation. This is the part of the answer where you should feel confident in bragging about yourself. You are telling a story, and the result is the "and we all lived happily ever after" part. You want to talk specifically about what you accomplished, how your actions positively impacted the organization, and any lessons you learned.
Thanks, Dennis. That's a great explanation of STAR. Do you think you could provide an example?
Yes, of course. Let's use the example from the resource guide so candidates can refer back to it. In this scenario, a candidate is asked the question, "Tell me about a time you were working with a team to accomplish an assignment and encountered a challenge." Now, for the situation, the candidate might answer, "For one of my classes, my work group was asked to recruit other students for a research project. We decided to host an event to explain the project and needs to students. On the day of the event, the room was set up and we had snacks and prizes for people who came. Unfortunately, no one attended the event." The candidate then might move on to the task portion. "Everyone in my group was defeated and frustrated that the work they had put into the event seemed to be a waste. I realized I needed to quickly gather the group to refocus. We needed to work together to develop a new plan to increase participation." For action, the candidate might answer, "I facilitated an on-the-spot meeting to develop a new plan. I acknowledged the frustrations of the group and helped them to see the positives. We had started early enough that we still had time to develop a new plan. I helped the group develop a plan for each person to connect with 10 students in their social circles within the next 2 days to participate. I scheduled a follow-up meeting to discuss our progress." And finally, for the result, the candidate could answer, "When the group met for our follow-up meeting, we had 10 students who were willing and committed to participating in the research project. We were able to finish the project successfully and got praise for our results. From this experience, I learned that starting a project early allows time for challenges to be addressed if they occur. With the appropriate preparation, I can still be successful despite encountering challenges."
That's an excellent example, Dennis. This should be very helpful for the candidates in preparing for the virtual hiring event. Before we wrap up, I do want to provide some information for those supporting the candidates, the counselors, talent sourcing coordinators, and job developers. For the counselors and talent sourcing coordinators, please review the resource guide with the candidate and help to make sure all items on the virtual hiring event checklist are completed. Submit any questions the candidate has to Dennis, and we will get it answered. Common questions will be put into a frequently asked questions section to help future candidates. There is also a questionnaire that we would like for candidates to fill out following this presentation. A link is provided on our website where you accessed this recording and the resource guide. Discuss needed accommodations with the candidate and provide them as you would for a traditional interview. If there are more than 6 candidates for a particular employer, they may be submitted as an alternate candidate. And counselors or talent sourcing coordinators, make sure you have submitted the final version of the candidate's resume to the BRS at least 1 week prior to the event so they can be forwarded to the employer partner.
Thanks, James. Those are great tips for counselors and TSCs. Now, how about for the job developers?
Thanks, Dennis. So for the job developers, you will only want to attend the virtual hiring event with the candidate if the candidate, the counselor, and you all decide that it is necessary. If it is decided that you will attend, whenever possible, allow the participant to speak for themselves. Try not to answer for the participant. You should also dress professionally, as if you were interviewing for the position yourself. Help the candidate prepare for the interview by checking their technology, preparing their environment, including identifying a proper professional space to interview, assisting them with researching the company and the position, preparing questions, helping them with making virtual eye contact, conducting virtual mock interviews, preparing how to close the interview, assisting the participant with following up after the interview, and don't forget to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss how the interview went.
Great points, James. As we are nearing the end of our presentation, I just want to cover some final thoughts. We have reviewed quite a bit of information today on how to be successful in interviewing at a virtual hiring event. While it may be a bit different from interviews you have had in the past, the goal is the same: to communicate to employers why you will be a valued member of their team. The key to virtual interviewing is to become comfortable with the technology and then prepare as you would for a traditional interview.
That's right, Dennis. And thank you for presenting today as well. I want to remind everyone to review the resource guide. This contains more detailed information for everything we covered today. And I want to thank all of the candidates for listening to our presentation today. I am sure with preparation, you are going to meet your goals and be successful.
Thank you, James, and thank you for presenting with me today. I want to wish all of you good luck at the virtual hiring event and in meeting your job goals. If anyone has any questions on today's presentation or on the virtual hiring event in general, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. If I don't know the answer, I will find the person who does. My email and phone number are included in the resource guide as well as the PowerPoint. Also, please remember to complete the questionnaire found on our website where you access this recording and the resource guide, so that we can follow up with you if you have any questions or need assistance. And with that, this concludes today's presentation. Thank you.
Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. Music by AudioNautics.com.